Bus stop on Mason Street. Darius Whitfield is 3 blocks from home, his phone buzzing. The rent is 12 days late, the electricity gets cut off tomorrow, and his college deposit is exactly $9,800. Then he sees it. A dark leather wallet, tucked beneath the bench, too thick to ignore. People step around it like it doesn't exist. He picks it up. Soft leather, heavy. Inside, crisp $100 bills. $10,000. Enough to fix everything. A bus pulls up, doors hissing open. This is his ride home. His mom is waiting. She skipped dinner last night so he could eat. Across the street, a man in a tailored coat pats his pockets, panic flashing before he disappears into the crowd. Darius stands frozen, heart pounding. Keep it, and no one would know. Return it, and everything stays the same. The driver shouts, "You getting on?" Darius looks at the money. Then he makes his choice. In that moment, he walks away from everything he needs, and straight into a future that's about to change his life forever. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The morning light struggled to penetrate the thin curtains of the Whitfields' apartment, casting long shadows across the worn linoleum floor. Darius balanced on a kitchen chair, his tall frame stretched toward the ceiling as he fiddled with the flickering fluorescent light. His fingers worked carefully with the loose connection, a skill learned from countless DIY repairs. "Baby, be careful up there," Lena called from the kitchen table, her voice carrying that familiar mix of worry and weariness. She sat surrounded by a sea of white envelopes, each one marked with bold red letters that spelled out "Final Notice" or "Past Due." "Almost got it, Mom," Darius responded, his voice steady despite the wobbling chair. The light flickered once more before holding steady. "There. Should hold for now." Lena managed a smile that didn't quite reach her tired eyes. She wore her faded blue nursing scrubs, already prepared for another double shift. Her hands moved methodically, sorting bills into piles, urgent, more urgent and desperate. The morning sun caught the silver strands in her hair, ones that hadn't been there just a year ago. "You're too young to be playing handyman," she sighed, quickly shuffling the bills into a neat stack and tucking them under a coffee mug, as if hiding them might make them disappear. Darius stepped down from the chair and straightened it under the table. "Better than paying someone we can't afford." His eyes drifted to the other piece of paper on the table, the one that wasn't a bill, but somehow felt just as heavy. The college acceptance letter lay there, pristine white against the scratched tabletop, its official letterhead seeming to mock them both. Lena followed his gaze and quickly reached for her coffee. "Don't you worry about any of this. You just focus on school and your job at the store." She stood, smoothing her scrubs with practiced movements. "Speaking of which, isn't your shift starting soon?" Darius nodded, grabbing his worn backpack from the hook by the door. The technical college's letter caught his eye again, and he felt that familiar ache in his chest. The deposit deadline was circled in red on their kitchen calendar, a date that loomed like a storm cloud. "Mrs. Martinez in 3B might need help with her groceries again," Lena mentioned, packing her lunch with careful movements that spoke of stretching every dollar. "She was struggling with those stairs yesterday." "I'll check on her on my way out," Darius promised, watching his mother pack yesterday's leftover rice into a plastic container. He noticed how she left most of it for him, though she'd never admit to skipping meals. The hallway outside their apartment smelled of old carpet and someone's breakfast cooking. Sure enough, Mrs. Martinez was attempting to navigate the narrow stairwell with 2 heavy bags. Her gray hair was tied back in a neat bun, and her face lit up when she saw Darius. "Oh, Darius, my guardian angel," she exclaimed, as he immediately took the bags from her trembling hands. "It's no trouble, Mrs. Martinez," he assured her, falling into step beside her slow pace. "How's your grandson doing in college?" Her face beamed with pride as they climbed. "Top of his class. First in our family to go, you know. Just like you'll be soon, yes?" Darius's smile faltered slightly, but he kept it in place. "We'll see," he answered diplomatically, shifting the grocery bags in his arms. Back in their apartment, Lena was putting on her worn coat, the one she insisted was fine, despite the fraying cuffs. "I left you sandwich money on the counter," she said, though Darius knew that money would go straight into his college fund instead of his lunch. "Thanks, Mom." He hugged her quickly, noticing how thin she felt in his arms. "Don't work too hard." She laughed, a sound that carried both love and irony. "That's like telling the sun not to shine." She patted his cheek, her hands rough from years of work. "You're a good boy, Darius. The best thing I ever did." After she left, Darius stood in the quiet apartment. The fixed light hummed steadily overhead, but his eyes were drawn again to the acceptance letter. He picked it up, running his fingers over the embossed logo. The words blurred slightly as he read them again. "We are pleased to inform you." The deposit amount listed at the bottom might as well have been $1 million for how far out of reach it felt. The morning sun had fully risen now, streaming through the window and illuminating the dust motes in the air. Darius could hear the city waking up outside, cars honking, people calling to each other, the distant rumble of the elevated train. Another day was beginning, full of the same struggles and small kindnesses that defined their lives. He carefully set the letter back down on the table and shouldered his backpack. The weight of responsibility settled onto his shoulders like an old friend as he headed out to face another day. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the cracked sidewalk as Darius trudged home from his shift at the grocery store. His feet ached from standing all day, and his mind wandered to the stack of homework waiting for him. A city bus rumbled past, leaving behind a cloud of exhaust that made him cough. His manager's words from earlier still rang in his ears. "Stop giving away extra bread, Whitfield. It's coming out of your paycheck next time." The warning had stung, but the grateful smile from the elderly woman with food stamps had been worth it. Near the bus stop, a discarded newspaper tumbled across his path, carried by a gust of wind. That's when he saw it. A dark leather wallet lying next to a bench, partially hidden by scattered leaves. Darius paused, glancing around. The stop was empty except for a teenager bobbing her head to music through headphones several feet away. "Hey!" he called out to her, pointing at the wallet. "Is this yours?" She barely looked up, shaking her head before returning to her phone screen. Darius bent down and picked up the wallet. The leather was expensive, buttery, soft, and well-worn. His stomach tightened as he opened it, looking for identification. The first thing he saw made his breath catch. Cash. Lots of it. Neat stacks of $100 bills filled the main compartment. His hands trembled as he counted quickly. $10,000. The amount made him dizzy. $10,000. More money than he'd ever seen in one place. Behind the cash, he found a business card. The name Richard Halvorson was printed in elegant black letters, along with an address in the business district. The card was crisp and professional, unlike the wrinkled receipts and food stamps that usually filled his mother's wallet. Darius sank onto the bench, the wallet heavy in his hands. His mind raced with possibilities. $10,000 would cover their overdue rent. It would pay the electricity bill that kept showing up in red envelopes. Most importantly, it would cover his college deposit with money to spare. He imagined surprising his mother, watching her face as he handed her the money. No more double shifts. No more skipped meals. No more fixing things with duct tape and prayers. The thought made his heart race. But then he remembered her words from countless conversations. Character is what you do when nobody's watching. His mother had worked honest hours her whole life, never taking shortcuts despite their struggles. The memory of her integrity felt like a weight in his chest. A passing car honked, startling him. Darius looked down at the wallet again, running his thumb over the smooth leather. The money inside could change their lives, but at what cost? The thought of his mother's face if she ever found out he'd kept someone else's money? That would be worse than any unpaid bill. With careful movements, he closed the wallet and slipped it into his backpack. The teenager with headphones had moved on, replaced by an elderly man waiting for the bus. Darius pulled out his phone and typed the address from the business card into his map app. It was a 20-minute walk in the opposite direction from home. His feet protested as he stood, already sore from his shift. His mother would worry if he was late, but he couldn't bear the thought of keeping the wallet overnight. The weight of it seemed to burn through his backpack, demanding immediate action. The walk took him through unfamiliar streets as the afternoon light began to fade. He passed coffee shops and small businesses, moving away from his neighborhood's familiar bodegas and laundromats. The buildings grew taller, their windows reflecting the setting sun. His phone guided him down a side street where a modest office building stood between a parking garage and a sandwich shop. The structure wasn't particularly impressive. Red brick with large windows, about 6 stories tall. A directory near the entrance listed various businesses and organizations. Darius stood on the sidewalk, gripping the wallet tightly in his hand. Through the glass doors, he could see a security desk in the lobby. His worn jeans and grocery store uniform felt suddenly inadequate. Would they even let him inside? Would they believe him? The teenager with headphones had barely given him a glance. Would these office workers see him any differently? The wallet seemed heavier now, as if the weight of his decision had made it more substantial. He thought again of his mother, of the college acceptance letter on their kitchen table, of all the things this money could fix. But he also thought of Mr. Halverson, whoever he was, perhaps worried sick about his lost wallet. Taking a deep breath, Darius squared his shoulders and faced the building's entrance. The right choice rarely felt like the easy one. That was another lesson his mother had taught him. The glass doors loomed before him, reflecting his uncertain expression back at him as he stood there, the found wallet clutched firmly in his grip. The lobby's bright fluorescent lights made Darius feel exposed as he stepped through the glass doors. The security guard looked up from his crossword puzzle, eyes narrowing slightly. The marble floor gleamed, reflecting Darius's worn sneakers. A potted plant taller than him stretched toward the high ceiling, and the air smelled of coffee and cleaning products. Behind a curved desk, a receptionist typed rapidly on her computer. Her pearl necklace caught the light as she moved, and her blonde hair was pulled back in a perfect knot. Darius approached slowly, conscious of his grocery store uniform and the way his backpack strap was fraying at the edge. "Excuse me," he said, his voice quieter than he intended. The receptionist continued typing for a moment before looking up, her expression neutral, but not unkind. "I'm looking for Mr. Richard Halverson. Do you have an appointment?" she asked, her fingers hovering over her keyboard. "No, ma'am." Darius pulled the wallet from his backpack. "I found his wallet, and I wanted to return it." Something in her expression shifted. Surprise, maybe curiosity. She picked up her phone and pressed a button. "Mr. Halverson, there's someone here with your wallet." She paused, listening. "Yes, sir. I'll send him up." She wrote out a visitor's badge, sliding it across the desk. "4th floor, suite 412. The elevator's to your left." Darius clipped the badge to his shirt, noting how the plastic felt cool against his fingers. The elevator doors were mirrored, and he caught glimpses of himself from multiple angles as he rode up. His reflection looked younger than he felt, more uncertain than he wanted to appear. The 4th floor was quiet except for the soft hum of air conditioning. Numbered doors lined the hallway, their frosted glass panels glowing from the lights within. Suite 412 had Halverson Community Development etched on the door in simple letters. Inside, the office was surprisingly modest. No fancy artwork or expensive furniture, just clean lines and practical arrangements. A few framed photographs showed ribbon-cutting ceremonies and construction sites. Through an open door, Darius could see a man sitting at a desk, reviewing papers. "Mr. Halverson?" Darius knocked lightly on the doorframe. Richard Halverson looked up, and Darius felt himself being assessed. The man was probably in his 60s, with silver hair and sharp eyes behind reading glasses. His suit was expensive but not flashy, and his desk was meticulously organized. "Come in," Halverson said, removing his glasses. His voice was measured, controlled. "You found my wallet?" Darius stepped forward, holding out the leather wallet. "Yes, sir. It was at the bus stop on Mason Street. I found your business card inside." Halverson took the wallet but didn't open it immediately. Instead, he studied Darius with an intensity that made him want to shuffle his feet. "Did you take anything?" The question hit like a slap. Darius felt heat rise in his cheeks, not from guilt, but from shame at being so quickly judged. "No, sir," he said firmly, though his voice wanted to waver. "Everything is exactly as I found it." Halverson opened the wallet, methodically checking its contents. His expression remained neutral as he counted the money, examined his cards, and inspected every compartment. The silence stretched uncomfortably. Finally, he gave a short nod. "Very well." He placed the wallet in his desk drawer and turned back to his papers. A clear dismissal. Darius stood there for a moment longer, wondering if he'd imagined the $10,000. Maybe it hadn't been as much as he thought. Maybe this was normal for people like Mr. Halverson, losing wallets full of cash and treating their return as unremarkable. "Thank you for your time," Darius said quietly, the words tasting bitter. He turned and walked out, past the framed photographs of community projects he now noticed were all about building trust and investing in people. The elevator felt colder on the way down. His visitor's badge seemed to mock him, a temporary pass into a world that had just reminded him exactly where he belonged. The receptionist was on the phone as he passed, and he dropped the badge in the collection box without meeting her eyes. Outside, the early evening air had turned cool. The sun was setting behind the office buildings, casting long shadows across the street. Darius started his walk home, each step feeling heavier than the last. The weight of the wallet was gone from his backpack, but something else seemed to have taken its place, a heaviness in his chest, a questioning he couldn't shake. Traffic moved past him in steady streams, people heading home to their own lives, their own struggles, their own choices. He thought about the elderly woman at the grocery store, how her thanks had felt genuine. He thought about his mother, who would be home soon from her second shift. He thought about the college acceptance letter waiting on their kitchen table. Had he made the right choice? The question followed him as he walked, as persistent as his shadow in the fading light. Behind him, unnoticed, Richard Halverson stood at his office window, watching the young man's retreating figure with careful consideration. The office had grown quiet as evening settled in. Most employees had left hours ago, leaving Richard Halverson alone with his thoughts and the leather wallet that now lay open on his polished desk. The building's cleaning crew worked methodically down the hallway, their vacuum cleaner a distant hum. Richard pulled out each bill, laying them in neat stacks. $10,000, exactly as he'd placed it. Not a single bill missing. He checked every card slot, every hidden compartment. Everything remained untouched, precisely as he had arranged it. His reflection in the window looked tired. The city lights were coming on, dotting the darkening sky like scattered stars. He thought about the other wallets, 5 of them over the past month, each lost, in carefully chosen locations. The results had been disappointing but predictable. The first had been returned with half the money missing, accompanied by a story about finder's fees. The second disappeared completely. The third came back empty, except for his driver's license, mailed anonymously. The fourth and fifth never resurfaced. Richard pulled out the visitor log from his desk drawer. Darius Whitfield, he read aloud, studying the careful handwriting. The address listed was in the Oakwood district, not the city's poorest neighborhood, but close. He opened his laptop and began typing, his fingers moving swiftly across the keyboard. The search results painted a familiar picture. Apartment complex with multiple code violations, high turnover rate, utility shut-off notices. The kind of place people lived when they had no other choice. Richard sat back in his chair, remembering the young man's face, the careful way he spoke, the flash of hurt when questioned about the money. He'd been too quick to judge, too wrapped in his own cynicism. Years of seeing people at their worst had left their mark. Community development work had taught him harsh lessons about human nature, about greed disguised as goodwill. Each betrayal had added another layer of caution, another reason to doubt. But this was different. The wallet had been a test, yes, but not a random one. Richard was looking for something specific, genuine integrity, the kind that couldn't be faked because it came from character rather than calculation. Someone who would do the right thing even when it cost them personally. Across town, in a small apartment with peeling wallpaper, Darius pushed his dinner around his plate. The macaroni and cheese had gone cold while he'd been lost in thought. His mother, Lena, sat across from him, her work uniform wrinkled from a double shift. "You're quiet tonight," she said, trying to catch his eye. "Everything okay at the store?" Darius forced a smile. "Yeah, Mom, just tired." He took another bite, not tasting it. The memory of those crisp bills felt like a weight in his stomach. $10,000. He could almost hear the numbers his mother had been muttering earlier while sorting bills. Rent past due, electricity warning, college deposit deadline approaching. "Mrs. Martinez from 3B asked about you," Lena continued, gathering their plates. "Said you helped her with groceries again this morning." "It wasn't much," Darius shrugged. Her arthritis was bothering her. The kitchen light flickered, a reminder of all the small repairs they couldn't afford. Darius thought about the wallet again, about Mr. Halverson's cold stare. Maybe he should have kept just a little, enough for the electric bill, maybe the rent. The thought made him feel sick. "I'm going to study for a bit," he said, standing up. His mother's smile was tired but proud. She didn't know about the wallet, about the choice he'd made. He wanted to keep it that way. Some disappointments were better carried alone. Back in his office, Richard picked up his car keys, their familiar weight settling in his palm. The cleaning crew had finished, leaving behind the sharp smell of disinfectant. He stood at the window one last time, looking out at the city he'd spent decades trying to improve. Every failed project, every betrayal of trust, had started with someone who looked promising on paper. But paper didn't show character. Real integrity revealed itself in small moments, in choices made when no one was watching, or when watching eyes were cold and suspicious. He thought again of Darius Whitfield, of the quiet dignity in his posture even as he was being doubted, of how he'd walked away empty-handed rather than argue or plead his case. There was something there, something genuine that all Richard's cynicism couldn't dismiss. The office was dark now except for his desk lamp. He pulled on his coat, the wallet secure in his pocket. The address from the visitor log was clear in his mind. His shoes echoed on the marble floor as he walked to the elevator. "Let's see who you really are," he said softly, pressing the button for the lobby. The doors closed with a gentle chime, leaving the office in silence. The morning sun filtered weakly through threadbare curtains, as Lena Whitfield rushed to get ready for work. Her uniform, freshly ironed despite the late hour she'd returned home, hung on the bathroom door. Dark circles beneath her eyes betrayed another restless night, worrying about bills, but her movements remained purposeful, practiced. "Darius, honey, did you remember to fix that loose board in the hallway?" she called out, pinning her name tag carefully to her collar. The safety pin was old, barely holding together, like so many things in their apartment. "Did it last night, Mom," Darius answered from the kitchen, where he sat with his math homework spread across the table. The acceptance letter peeked out from beneath his textbook, a constant reminder of dreams just out of reach. Their morning routine had a familiar rhythm. Lena checking her bag for bus fare, Darius clearing away breakfast dishes, both of them dancing around the things they couldn't change. The ancient coffee maker sputtered its last drops into the pot, filling the small kitchen with its warm aroma. A knock at the door broke through their quiet morning, sharp and unexpected. Lena glanced at the clock, frowning. It was too early for the landlord, though her heart skipped at the thought. They were behind on rent again. "I'll get it," she said, smoothing her uniform. When she opened the door, she found herself facing a distinguished older man in an expertly tailored suit. His presence seemed almost out of place in their worn hallway, like a page torn from a different story and pasted into theirs. "Mrs. Whitfield?" His voice was steady, professional. "I'm Richard Halverson." Behind her, Lena heard Darius's chair scrape against the linoleum floor. She turned to see her son frozen in place, his face a mixture of surprise and uncertainty. "I apologize for coming by so early," Richard continued, his eyes moving between mother and son. "But I wanted to speak with you about something your son did yesterday." Lena's hand tightened on the doorknob. "Is everything all right?" Her voice carried the wariness of a mother who had learned to expect bad news. "More than all right," Richard said, his expression softening. "Yesterday, your son found my wallet. It contained $10,000 in cash." Lena's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes widening as she turned to look at Darius. "He tracked down my office and returned it. Every dollar intact." Richard's words carried weight beyond their simple meaning. "In 30 years of business, I've never seen such honest character." Tears welled in Lena's eyes as the full impact of what she was hearing sank in. Her son had held enough money to solve all their problems, and had chosen to return it. Pride and love crashed over her like a wave. Darius started to speak, but Richard held up a hand. "Please," he said, reaching into his jacket. He withdrew an envelope, thick and crisp. "I believe in rewarding integrity. Inside this envelope, you'll find 2 things. First, a check that I hope will ease some immediate concerns." Lena's hands trembled as she accepted the envelope. "Second," Richard continued, his voice warming further, "an offer. I'd like to sponsor Darius's complete education. Full tuition, books, housing, everything he needs to succeed." A small sob escaped Lena's throat. Tears now fell freely down her cheeks. "There's more," Richard said, turning to address Darius directly. "I run a community development firm. We help build affordable housing, create job programs, revitalize neighborhoods. I'd like to offer you an internship. Your perspective, your character. That's exactly what we need." The small apartment seemed to hold its breath. Through the window, morning traffic hummed distantly, the world continuing its routine while their small corner of it transformed. "You raised an honest son, Mrs. Whitfield," Richard said softly. "That's increasingly rare these days. Integrity like that deserves a future." Darius stood rooted to the spot, his homework forgotten on the table behind him. The acceptance letter that had seemed like an impossible dream just moments ago now held new promise. "I don't know what to say," Lena managed, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "Say yes," Richard smiled. "Let's give that integrity somewhere to grow." He turned to leave, his purpose accomplished. As his footsteps faded down the hallway, Lena turned to her son. Without a word, she pulled him into a fierce embrace, her tears dampening his shoulder. "You changed our lives," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Darius held his mother tightly, feeling the years of struggle in her thin frame, the weight of sacrifice in her arms. Afternoon sunlight warmed the small kitchen table, where Darius and Lena sat shoulder to shoulder. Papers spread before them like a map to a new future. The envelope Richard had left contained not just a check that made Lena's hands shake, but a detailed offer letter printed on thick cream-colored paper with an embossed letterhead. "Read it again," Lena said softly, her work uniform still on from the morning, though she'd called in to take the rest of the day off. This moment felt too important to rush. Darius picked up the letter, his voice steady despite the flutter in his stomach. "Mr. Richard Halvorsen, in recognition of exceptional personal character," he paused, still uncomfortable with the praise, "offers a full educational scholarship covering tuition, books, supplies, and housing costs at the Technical College of Acceptance." Lena reached over and squeezed his hand. The acceptance letter that had sat unopened for so long now lay beside them, its corners slightly worn from all the times Darius had picked it up and put it down again. "There's more about the internship," Darius continued, turning to the second page. "The position includes mentorship and hands-on experience in community development projects." He looked up at his mother. "It says the firm's been struggling lately. They need fresh ideas." "Your ideas," Lena corrected gently. She stood up to pour them both another cup of coffee, the ancient maker sputtering in protest. "Those drawings you're always working on, the ones about affordable housing. This is your chance to make them real." Darius ran his fingers over the edge of his worn notebook, filled with sketches and plans he'd never shown anyone. "What if I'm not ready? What if it's too much?" Lena sat back down, sliding his coffee cup closer. "Baby, look at me." She waited until he met her eyes. "You've been ready. You've been doing community development work since you were old enough to walk, helping Mrs. Johnson with her groceries, looking out for those kids at the store, fixing things around here without anyone asking." "That's different," Darius protested. "That's just helping out." "That's exactly what this work is about," Lena insisted. "You understand what people need because you've lived it. That's worth more than any fancy degree." They fell quiet for a moment, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. Darius picked up the check again, still stunned by the number of zeros. It would cover their back rent, the utility bills, with enough left over to fix the car that had been sitting broken in the parking lot for months. "Remember what you told me when you started at the grocery store?" Lena asked, stirring her coffee slowly. "You said you wanted to make things better, even if it was just putting extra bread in someone's bag when they were short on money." Darius nodded, remembering those small acts of kindness that could have cost him his job. "I just couldn't watch people go hungry." "And now look," Lena smiled, tapping the offer letter. "All because you did the right thing with that wallet. Not for reward, not for recognition, just because it was right." Darius thought about Richard's cold reception at the office, how different it had been from this morning's visit. He was testing people, he realized aloud. The wallet. It was a test. "And you passed it just by being yourself," Lena said proudly. She reached for her purse, pulling out a small notebook where she kept their budget. "Now, let's figure out exactly what we need to do to get you started." They spent the next hour making lists. Clothes he would need for the office, supplies for school, bus schedules to learn. Lena insisted on ironing his best shirt for tomorrow, though Darius protested it wasn't necessary. As evening approached, Darius stood in their small bathroom, practicing his handshake in the mirror like Lena had shown him. His reflection looked back at him, unchanged, yet somehow different. The weight of opportunity pressed on his shoulders, but it felt lighter than the burden of having none. In his room, he laid out everything for the morning. Pressed shirt, his only tie, borrowed from a neighbor. The leather folder Lena had surprised him with from the dollar store to hold his papers. It wasn't much, but it was a start. "You're going to do great," Lena said from his doorway, watching him arrange and rearrange his things. "Just remember why you're there." "Because I returned the wallet?" Darius asked, adjusting the tie for the 10th time. "Because you care about making things better," she corrected. "The wallet just showed them what I've always known about you." Darius walked back to the kitchen, where the acceptance letter still lay on the table. He picked it up, feeling its weight in his hands, no longer a reminder of what he couldn't have, but a door opening to what he could do. Carefully, he placed it beside the check from Richard. The two pieces of paper represented such different things. One, a dream he'd thought impossible. The other, the key to making it real. Together, they formed a bridge between his past and his future, built on a foundation of simple honesty. Darius stood before the glass doors of Halverson Community Development, tugging at his borrowed tie. The morning sun reflected off the building's windows, making him squint. Inside, the lobby looked different from yesterday. Busier, more intimidating. His dollar store folder felt flimsy compared to the leather portfolios tucked under executives' arms. The receptionist, a different one from yesterday, looked up with practiced politeness. "Can I help you?" "I'm Darius Whitfield. I'm supposed to start today." His voice came out steadier than he felt. "Ah, yes, Mr. Halverson's new intern." She made a quick phone call, then gestured toward the elevator. "4th floor. Someone will meet you." The elevator doors opened to reveal sleek offices with modern furniture, nothing like the worn chairs and scratched desks at his high school. People hurried past in pressed suits and clicking heels, their conversations full of terms he'd never heard before. A young woman in a blazer approached. "Darius, I'm Amanda from HR. Let's get you settled." She led him through a maze of cubicles to a small workspace near the window. "This will be your desk." His desk. The words felt strange. It had a computer, a phone, even a nameplate. Darius Whitfield, Community Development Intern. He ran his fingers over the letters, remembering how just yesterday he'd been stocking shelves. Richard appeared suddenly, his presence commanding attention. "Good morning, Darius. Ready to begin?" Without waiting for an answer, he turned to address the nearby staff. "Everyone, this is Darius Whitfield, our new intern. He'll be assisting with community outreach and development projects." A few people nodded politely before returning to their work. Richard handed Darius a thick folder. "Review these. They're our current housing proposals. We'll discuss them later." Then he was gone, leaving Darius alone with the overwhelming stack of documents. The morning passed in a blur of paperwork and orientation meetings. During lunch, Darius sat alone in the break room, watching others cluster in familiar groups. He pulled out his worn notebook, using the time to transfer some of his sketches onto proper paper. "What's that?" Darius looked up to find Amanda peering at his drawings. "Just some ideas. Housing layouts that could work better for families like—" He hesitated. "For working families." She picked up one of the sketches. "This is interesting. You've got the laundry facilities on every floor instead of the basement. Most people can't afford washers in their units," Darius explained. "But carrying laundry up and down 6 flights of stairs with kids, or when you work late shifts, it's rough. My mom—" He stopped himself, unsure if personal stories belonged here. But Amanda was still studying the drawing. And these shared spaces between units? For childcare. The words came easier now. Neighbors could watch each other's kids. Build community. Save money. Other staff members drifted over, curious about the discussion. Darius found himself explaining more of his ideas: how to arrange parking to make grocery unloading easier, where to place security cameras so residents felt safe but not watched, why certain maintenance features needed to be accessible to residents. "These are based on real experiences," someone commented. Darius nodded. "They're things I've seen, things that could help." The afternoon brought a project meeting. Darius sat quietly in the back, listening as team leaders discussed budget constraints and zoning issues. When they debated the merits of various amenities, he gathered his courage and raised his hand. "Yes, Darius?" Richard's tone was neutral. "Instead of a fitness center that needs expensive equipment and maintenance, what about converting that space into a multi-purpose room?" His voice grew stronger as he continued. "It could be a study space for kids during the day, adult education classes in the evening, community meetings on weekends. One room, many uses, lower costs." The room fell silent. Darius's heart pounded, but he pulled out his notebook and walked to the whiteboard. "I sketched some layouts." His hand was steady as he drew, explaining how flexible furniture and storage solutions could transform the space for different needs. When he finished, the project manager spoke first. "This actually solves several problems we've been facing." Others chimed in with questions and suggestions. Darius answered each one, drawing from years of watching his mother and neighbors navigate similar spaces. He didn't use fancy terms or statistics, just practical solutions born from real life. At the edge of the room, Richard stood with his arms crossed, observing. His expression remained unreadable, but his eyes followed Darius's explanations intently. When Darius demonstrated how a simple change in the building's entry layout could create natural gathering spaces for residents, a flicker of approval crossed Richard's face. The meeting ended with Darius's multi-purpose room concept added to the official plans. As people filed out, several stopped to compliment his ideas. He returned to his desk feeling slightly dazed, but more grounded. His dollar store folder didn't seem so out of place anymore. Through his office window, Richard watched his new intern carefully organize his notes, already preparing for tomorrow. The boy's confident presentation had surprised him. There was more here than just honesty. The morning sun streamed through the office windows as Darius adjusted his new tie, a gift from his mother to celebrate his first paycheck. The past week had transformed their lives in ways he still couldn't quite believe. The electricity stayed on. The fridge held fresh groceries. His mother didn't have to work double shifts anymore. At his desk, Darius spread out his sketches and notes. His initial nervousness had given way to quiet determination. The team had started implementing his multi-purpose room design, and their positive response gave him courage to voice more ideas. "Morning, Darius," Amanda called out, dropping a stack of reports on his desk. "The research you requested on local housing needs." He smiled, grateful for her help. Since that first lunch break, she'd become an unofficial mentor, helping him navigate office politics and terminology. "Thanks. I've been working on something bigger." "Tell me more," she said, pulling up a chair. Darius pulled out his notebook, no longer worn and hesitant, but filled with detailed plans and careful calculations. "It's an affordable housing project, but different from our usual approach. Instead of just building units, we create a whole support system." He showed her his drawings: apartment buildings designed around central courtyards, ground floor spaces for small businesses, and dedicated areas for community services. The idea is to help families build stability, not just find housing. Amanda studied the plans with growing interest. "This is comprehensive. You've thought about everything from childcare to job training?" "Because that's what people really need," Darius explained, thinking of his mother's struggles. "A roof isn't enough if you can't afford to keep it over your head." Other team members began gathering around his desk, drawn by their discussion. Darius walked them through each element. how the layout encouraged neighborhood connections, why certain services were essential, how shared resources could reduce individual costs. "The numbers actually work," said Mark from accounting, reviewing Darius's calculations. "If we partner with local businesses and service providers, the operational costs stay manageable." By lunchtime, word of Darius's proposal had spread through the office. When Richard stopped by his desk, Darius was ready. "Mr. Halverson, I'd like to present something to you." Richard gestured toward his office. "After you." Inside, Darius laid out his vision with growing confidence. He didn't just show drawings, he shared stories about single mothers like Lena, working multiple jobs while dreaming of better futures for their children, about elderly neighbors supporting each other when they couldn't afford help, about teenagers who needed safe spaces to study and grow. "This isn't just housing," he explained. "It's a chance for families to break the cycle of struggling just to survive." Richard listened intently, asking occasional questions that pushed Darius to defend his choices. Why this location? How would they select residents? What made this different from failed projects of the past? Darius had answers ready, grounded in his lived experience and newly acquired professional knowledge. He'd spent evenings researching similar initiatives, learning from their successes and failures. At home, the changes in Darius were clear. Lena noticed how he carried himself differently, shoulders straight, eyes forward. Their dinner conversations had shifted from worrying about bills to discussing community needs and possible solutions. "You're becoming a leader," she told him one evening, her eyes bright with pride. "Just like I always knew you could be." Darius squeezed her hand. "I learned from the best. Everything in this project, the way it supports families, builds community. It's all based on what you taught me." The next morning, Darius arrived early to refine his proposal. He incorporated feedback from various team members, strengthening the financial projections and implementation timeline. His desktop computer had replaced his notebook, but the heart of his vision remained the same. Walking past his desk, Richard noticed Darius's absorption in his work. The boy who'd nervously returned a wallet had found his purpose. His integrity wasn't just about doing the right thing. It was about creating opportunities for others to rise. Later that afternoon, Darius knocked on Richard's door with his completed proposal. The draft was professional, detailed, and compelling. A perfect blend of practical experience and innovative thinking. Richard reviewed the final changes carefully while Darius waited. Each page showed meticulous attention to detail, from the architectural drawings to the community impact assessments. The margin notes revealed deep thinking about potential challenges and solutions. Looking up from the document, Richard nodded approvingly. His usual reserve softened into genuine appreciation for how far his young intern had come. Darius sat straighter, ready to defend his vision. But Richard's nod said everything. The proposal wasn't just good, it was exactly what the firm needed. The downtown office building loomed above Darius as he straightened his new suit jacket, another gift from his mother, bought specially for this meeting. His reflection in the polished glass doors showed someone he barely recognized. Confident, professional, ready. Inside the conference room, the team made final preparations. Amanda adjusted the projector while Mark distributed presentation folders. The investor would arrive any minute. "Remember," Richard said quietly, appearing beside Darius, "just tell the truth. That's your strength." Darius nodded, grateful for the advice. He'd practiced his presentation countless times in front of his bedroom mirror, but nothing could fully prepare him for this moment. The project documents spread before him represented more than just business plans. They held the dreams of his community. The investor arrived precisely on time, flanked by two analysts. He introduced himself as James Patterson, his firm handshake and expensive suit marking him as someone accustomed to power. The team took their seats around the glossy conference table. Richard opened the meeting with a brief overview of the firm's history. Then, with a gesture that surprised everyone, he turned the presentation over to Darius. "This project belongs to our newest team member. I'll let him tell you why." Darius rose slowly, his heart pounding. The conference room's floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the city sprawling below. Somewhere out there, his mother was working, unaware that her son stood on the brink of changing their lives forever. "Good morning," he began, his voice steady despite his nerves. "I'd like to show you more than just another housing development. I want to show you how we can transform communities." The first slides appeared on the screen. Not generic architectural renderings, but real photographs of his neighborhood. Children playing on broken sidewalks, elderly residents helping each other up crumbling steps, single parents rushing between multiple jobs. "These are my neighbors," Darius explained. "Hardworking people who need more than just affordable rent. They need a foundation for building better lives." His presentation flowed naturally, mixing professional analysis with personal insight. He showed how the project's design grew from real needs he'd witnessed firsthand. The courtyard layout wasn't just aesthetically pleasing. It created safe spaces for children to play, while parents watched from their windows. The ground-floor businesses weren't random additions. They offered employment opportunities within walking distance. Patterson leaned forward, his interest evident. "Your cost projections seem ambitious. How can you guarantee these numbers?" Darius clicked to his financial analysis. "By understanding how people actually live. See this community kitchen space? It's not just an amenity. For single parents working late shifts, sharing meal preparation saves money and builds support networks. These solar panels aren't just for sustainability. They reduce utility costs for residents and generate income for maintenance." The investors' analysts scribbled notes furiously as Darius continued. He explained how each element of the project served multiple purposes, maximizing return on investment while genuinely serving community needs. "What makes you so certain this will work?" Patterson asked, his tone curious rather than challenging. Darius paused, then spoke from his heart. "Because I've lived it. I know what it's like to watch your mother work herself sick just to keep the lights on. I know how hard it is to study when you're worried about eviction. But I also know how people come together to help each other survive. This project takes that natural community strength and gives it room to grow." Richard's expression remained neutral, but his eyes showed pride. The rest of the team sat straighter, sharing glances of approval. Patterson set down his pen. "Most presentations I see are full of market analysis and profit projections. Those matter, of course, but they're meaningless without real understanding. You've shown us both." The meeting continued with detailed questions about implementation, timeline, and risk management. Darius answered each one clearly, supported by team members when necessary. The morning stretched into afternoon as they explored every aspect of the proposal. Finally, Patterson closed his folder. "I've seen countless development pitches, Mr. Whitfield. Few have impressed me like this one. We'll need to conduct our due diligence, of course, but I'm very interested in moving forward." The energy in the room shifted from tension to cautious excitement. Richard stood to shake Patterson's hand. "We'll prepare the additional documentation you requested." As the team began packing up, Patterson approached Darius personally. "That was exceptional work, young man. Your authenticity is refreshing in this industry." After the investors left, Richard gathered everyone together. "This is a milestone for our firm," he announced, "and we have Darius to thank for it. His vision and integrity have shown us a new way forward." The team's congratulations surrounded Darius like a warm wave. Amanda hugged him. Mark clapped his shoulder. Even the usually quiet accountants offered enthusiastic praise. Later that evening, Darius practically floated up the stairs to their apartment. He found Lena in the kitchen, preparing dinner after her shift. "Mom!" he called out, his voice trembling with excitement. "It's finally happening." Lena turned, sensing the joy in his voice, ready to share in her son's triumph. The simple kitchen suddenly felt like the birthplace of miracles. The next morning's sunrise brought an unfamiliar chill to the office. Darius noticed it immediately. Hushed conversations that stopped when he approached. Sideways glances from colleagues who'd celebrated with him just yesterday. Something had changed overnight. Amanda, usually warm and friendly, avoided eye contact when he passed her desk. Mark shuffled papers nervously, pretending to be busy. The atmosphere felt heavy with unspoken words. At precisely 9:15 a.m., Richard's assistant appeared at Darius's workspace. "Mr. Halverson needs to see you." Her tone was professional but distant, nothing like her usual cheerful self. The walk to Richard's office felt longer than ever. Through the glass walls, Darius could see Richard sitting rigidly at his desk, studying documents spread before him. The investor, Mr. Patterson, stood by the window, his back turned to the door. "Come in, Darius," Richard said, his voice carefully neutral. "Please, close the door." Patterson turned slowly, his expression hard. Gone was yesterday's warmth and enthusiasm, replaced by cold professionalism. "Mr. Whitfield, some concerning information has come to our attention during our standard background review." Richard pushed several papers across his desk. "These are records we need to discuss." Darius's hands trembled slightly as he picked up the first document. His heart sank. There it was, the school suspension from 2 years ago, when he'd confronted a bully who was tormenting a freshman. The report made no mention of the context, just listed it as a violent incident. "And these," Patterson continued, "are your family's rental history records." More papers, late notices, payment plans, the struggles of a single-mother household laid bare in cold, bureaucratic language. Each document painted a picture of financial instability, completely ignoring the reality of their circumstances. "There's also the matter of your neighborhood associations," Patterson added, his tone suggesting something sinister in simply living where they did. "Several known criminal elements reside in your area." "I can explain," Darius started, but Patterson raised his hand. "Furthermore," he continued, "questions have been raised about the wallet incident that led to your position here." The accusation hung in the air like poison. Darius felt his chest tighten. "What questions?" An anonymous source suggested the entire thing might have been orchestrated, a setup to gain attention and opportunity. Richard remained silent, his face unreadable. The same man who had praised Darius's integrity now wouldn't even look him in the eye. "That's not true," Darius said firmly, fighting to keep his voice steady. "I would never—" "The fact remains," Patterson interrupted, "that these revelations raise serious concerns about risk management. Our investment committee cannot proceed under these circumstances. The project, the housing development, the community transformation, everything they'd worked toward, dissolving in minutes because of assumptions and prejudice. The funding offer is withdrawn," Patterson stated flatly. "I'll have our legal team send the formal documentation." He gathered his belongings, nodded curtly to Richard, and left without another word. Silence filled the office. Darius waited for Richard to say something, to defend him, to fight back, to show any sign of the trust they'd built. Instead, Richard simply straightened papers on his desk. "I think it's best if you take some time off," Richard finally said, still not meeting Darius's gaze. "We'll need to reevaluate the situation." "You know me," Darius said quietly. "You know who I am." "Do I?" Richard's response cut deep. "Perhaps I was too quick to—" He left the sentence unfinished, but its meaning was clear. Too quick to trust. Too quick to believe. Too quick to see past appearances. Darius stood slowly. Through the glass walls, he could see his colleagues pretending not to watch. How many of them believed the rumors? How many had already decided he was exactly what they'd probably assumed from the start? "Should I pack my things?" Darius asked. "Let's call it a temporary leave," Richard replied diplomatically. "Until this situation resolves itself." The walk back to his desk felt like a walk of shame. Amanda suddenly needed to make copies. Mark became intensely focused on his computer screen. No one would look at him as he gathered his few personal items into his backpack. The bus ride home was a blur. Every bump in the road seemed to echo Patterson's words. Every stoplight reflected Richard's doubt. The weight of shattered dreams pressed down on him like a physical force. Lena was home early, a rare occurrence that today felt like another cruel twist. She took one look at his face and knew something was wrong. "Baby, what happened?" Darius sank into a kitchen chair, the same chair where they'd celebrated just days ago. The acceptance letter still sat on the counter, now seeming to mock him with its promises. "They found out about everything, Mom," he said quietly. "The suspension, the late rent, where we live. They think I set up the whole wallet thing." Lena's face showed a mother's pain at seeing her child hurt. She reached for his hand across the table. "Maybe," Darius whispered, his voice breaking. "I was never meant for this." The morning sun cast long shadows across broken sidewalks as Darius walked through his neighborhood. His feet felt heavy, each step a reminder of yesterday's humiliation. The familiar streets looked different now. Not just home, but a mark against him in the eyes of people like Patterson. A commotion drew his attention. Outside the Martinez family's apartment building, furniture cluttered the sidewalk. Mrs. Martinez, still in her nursing scrubs from the night shift, argued with a man in a suit while her children huddled near their belongings. "Please, we just need more time," she pleaded. "I can get the money." "The development deal fell through," the man stated flatly. "The building's being sold. You have until Friday." Darius stopped. The failed project, his failed project, was already having consequences. Real people, his neighbors, were paying the price for his downfall. 2 buildings down, he spotted the Jacksons loading boxes into their old station wagon. The Williams family across the street had a similar notice taped to their door. The same story repeated up and down the block. His chest tightened. He'd dreamed of helping these families, of building something better. Instead, they were worse off than before. The weight of it pressed down on him until he could hardly breathe. Then he remembered something from his time at the firm. Tenant rights laws, building codes, legal requirements for eviction notices, knowledge he'd absorbed during meetings and document reviews. Maybe he couldn't build new homes right now, but he could still help protect the ones people had. Darius approached Mrs. Martinez. "Excuse me," he said to the suit-wearing man. "Can I see that eviction notice?" The man looked annoyed, but handed it over. Darius studied it carefully, remembering the details Richard had drilled into him about proper documentation. "This isn't legal," he said firmly. "The notice period is too short, and there's no court order. You can't just throw people out." "Listen, kid," the man started. "No, you listen," Darius interrupted, his voice steady. "I can call legal aid right now. They'll tell you the same thing." Mrs. Martinez looked at him with desperate hope. "You know about these things." "Some," Darius admitted. "And I know who to ask for help." He pulled out his phone and called Sarah Thompson, a legal aid lawyer he'd met during project research. She answered on the 3rd ring. "Sarah? It's Darius Whitfield. Remember those tenant rights cases we discussed? I need your help." Within an hour, Sarah arrived with information packets and contact numbers. The suit-wearing man retreated, promising to review the situation with his superiors. Darius didn't stop there. He went door to door, gathering families in the community center. Years of watching his mother organize church fundraisers had taught him how to run a meeting. He explained their rights in simple terms, helped fill out legal forms, and connected people with resources. "We're stronger together," he told the worried faces before him. "If we organize, they have to listen." He used the skills he'd learned at the firm in new ways. The same attention to detail that impressed Richard now helped spot errors in eviction notices. His understanding of building codes revealed violations landlords would rather fix than have reported. By afternoon, he'd helped set up a tenants association. Mr. Washington, a retired teacher, offered his living room as a meeting space. Mrs. Jackson brought coffee and homemade cookies. The Williams kids helped distribute flyers. "Why are you doing this?" someone asked. After everything fell apart, Darius thought about it. "Because it's right," he said simply, "and because I can." He worked through the day, moving from building to building. No cameras recorded his efforts. No rich investors watched to judge his worth. He helped because these were his neighbors, his community, and they needed him. At sunset, he stood on the stoop of another building, knocking on another door. His feet ached. His voice was hoarse from explaining rights and procedures all day. But when the door opened to reveal another worried face, he smiled. "Hi," he said. "I heard you got an eviction notice. Can I help?" The elderly woman looked at him uncertainly. "You're not from the landlord?" "No, ma'am. I'm just a neighbor. And I know some things that might help." She studied him for a moment, then stepped aside to let him in. As he followed her to her small kitchen table, Darius felt something he hadn't since yesterday's collapse. Purpose. There was no guarantee this would work. No promise of reward or recognition. Just the quiet certainty that doing the right thing mattered, even when, especially when, no one was watching to judge his worth. He sat down at the woman's table, pulled out the legal aid information, and began to explain her rights one more time. The community center's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Darius arranged folding chairs in a circle. Evening shadows stretched across the worn linoleum floor while residents filed in, their faces etched with worry. Mrs. Martinez helped distribute paper cups of coffee from a dented urn, the warmth offering small comfort against their shared fears. "Thank you all for coming," Darius said, his voice stronger than he felt. 20 pairs of eyes turned to him. Mothers still in work uniforms, fathers with calloused hands, elderly neighbors who'd lived here longer than he'd been alive. "I know everyone's scared, but we're not powerless." He spread documents across a rickety card table, tenant rights pamphlets, building inspection reports, legal aid contact information. His hands moved with practiced certainty, muscle memory from countless hours organizing files at the firm. "First thing to understand is they can't just throw us out," he explained, pointing to key sections of the housing code. "There's a process, legal requirements, and we have rights." Mr. Washington raised his hand. "But what if they pressure us? Try to force us out?" "That's why we're here together," Darius answered. "Single drops of water can't do much. But an ocean?" He gestured to the gathered crowd. "That's different. United, we're stronger." He walked them through the steps, documenting violations, filing complaints, requesting inspections. The same processes he'd studied during his brief time at the firm now became tools for his neighbors. When terms got technical, he translated them into plain language, drawing from his experience helping his mother understand complex medical bills. "Write everything down," he advised, passing out notebooks donated by the corner store. "Take pictures. Keep copies. Details matter." Mrs. Jackson spoke up, her voice trembling. "I'm behind on rent. Can they use that?" "Being behind doesn't void your rights," Darius assured her. "We can work with legal aid to set up payment plans. The important thing is documentation and communication." As he spoke, Confidence grew in his voice. This wasn't the polished corporate world that had rejected him. This was his community, where practical solutions mattered more than perfect presentations. Unknown to Darius, Richard Halvorson stood in the shadows near the entrance, watching. He'd come seeking answers about Darius's character, but found himself witnessing something unexpected. Darius moved through the crowd, addressing concerns one by one. When Mr. Peterson mentioned a broken heater, Darius pulled out building codes on his phone. When Mrs. Thompson worried about retaliation, he explained anti-harassment statutes. "Remember," Darius said, "every certified letter you send, every inspection you request, every violation you report, it builds our case. They're counting on us feeling helpless. We're not." A young mother bounced a fussy baby while trying to take notes. Without missing a beat in his explanation about notice periods, Darius gently took the infant, continuing to speak as he paced and patted the child's back. The baby settled. The mother smiled gratefully, able to focus on writing. It was a small moment, but it captured something essential about who Darius was. Someone who saw needs and met them, naturally and without fanfare. "We'll meet again Thursday," he concluded. "Bring your neighbors. The more of us working together, the better our chances." As people stood to leave, they lingered to share stories, exchange phone numbers, offer support. The atmosphere had shifted from fear to determination. Where there had been isolated worry, now there was collective purpose. Mrs. Martinez touched Darius's arm. "My sister's building got the same notice. Could you—" "Give me her address," Darius replied without hesitation. "I'll stop by tomorrow." He stayed late, answering questions, reviewing documents, connecting people with resources. The fancy internship might be gone, but the knowledge he'd gained remained, and now it served a deeper purpose. From his hidden vantage point, Richard watched Darius work. This wasn't the manufactured integrity of returning a planted wallet. This was something purer, helping others when there was no reward, no recognition, no reason, except that it was right. Darius gathered scattered coffee cups and straightened chairs, still answering questions as people drifted out. His tie was loosened, his sleeves rolled up, but he moved with the quiet authority of someone who knew his purpose. A week ago, he'd presented polished proposals in Richard's boardroom. Now he worked in a shabby community center with mismatched furniture. Yet somehow, he seemed more confident here, more himself. Richard observed as Darius helped Mrs. Washington with her coat, carried Mr. Peterson's heavy binder, promised to check on Ms. Thompson's grandchildren tomorrow. Each small act of consideration came naturally, without performance or expectation. This, Richard realized, was who Darius truly was. Not the person trying to fit into a corporate world, but someone whose genuine character shone brightest when serving others. No test could have revealed this truth. It had to be witnessed in moments when Darius thought no one was watching. In the dim light of the emptying community center, Darius continued his work, unaware of his observer, focused only on the next person he could help. The morning sun cast long shadows through Richard Halvorson's office windows as Darius stepped inside. His shoes barely made a sound on the polished floor, each step measured and deliberate. The familiar space felt different now. The mahogany desk, the carefully arranged diplomas, the view of the city beyond, all seemed to hold a weight he hadn't noticed before. Richard sat in his leather chair, hands folded on the desk, watching Darius with an unreadable expression. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words. Darius stood straight, his posture betraying neither defiance nor submission. The suit he wore, the same one he'd interviewed in, felt stiff against his skin. "Please, sit," Richard finally said, gesturing to the chair across from him. Darius settled into the seat, preparing himself for whatever came next. He'd rehearsed various scenarios on his walk here: termination, disappointment, perhaps even accusations. But Richard's next words caught him off guard. "I was at the community center yesterday." The statement hung in the air. Darius's hands tightened slightly on the armrests, but his expression remained calm. "I saw everything," Richard continued, his voice thoughtful. "The meeting you organized, how you handled the residents' concerns, the way you translated complex legal terms into something they could understand." He leaned forward slightly. "You didn't know I was there?" "No, sir," Darius responded quietly. "I didn't." Richard stood, walking to the window. The city sprawled below, a maze of buildings and streets where countless stories played out unseen. "When I started in community development, I had big dreams, ambitious plans, but somewhere along the way, I let other voices drown out what mattered." He turned back to face Darius. "I let them do it again with you." Darius remained silent, listening. The morning traffic hummed faintly through the windows. "You know, watching you yesterday, it wasn't like watching an intern or even a young professional," Richard continued. "It was like watching someone who truly understood what this work means. Not the presentations or the proposals, but the real impact on real lives." He returned to his desk, pulling out a familiar file. Darius's background check. "This paper says you're a risk, that your circumstances make you unreliable." He closed the file deliberately. But paper doesn't show character. It doesn't show someone staying late to help elderly neighbors understand legal documents. It doesn't show someone holding a baby, so a mother can take notes. It doesn't show integrity. Darius shifted slightly in his chair. "Sir," "About the accusations." Richard held up a hand. "No, you don't need to defend yourself. Your actions speak clearly enough." He paused, studying Darius's face. "Tell me something. Why did you do it? After everything that happened here, after the project collapsed, after the investors pulled out, why step in to help those families?" The question wasn't accusatory. If anything, there was genuine curiosity in Richard's tone. Darius considered his words carefully. "Because they needed help," he said simply. "And I knew how to give it." He looked down at his hands for a moment, then back up at Richard. "The knowledge I gained here, about housing codes, tenant rights, legal processes, it could make a difference. Whether I had a title or an office didn't change that." Richard nodded slowly, something shifting in his expression. "No bitterness about how things ended?" "Being angry wouldn't help anyone," Darius replied. "And honestly, sir, I was too busy trying to figure out how to stop those evictions to think about what I'd lost." A small smile touched Richard's lips. "That's exactly what I mean. You see, Darius, when I placed that wallet months ago, I thought I was testing people's honesty. A simple yes or no. Would they return it or not?" He shook his head. "But real character isn't about passing a single test. It's about who you are when everything falls apart, when there's nothing to gain and everything to lose." He stood again, this time moving to face Darius directly. "I've spent years trying to measure integrity with tests and background checks. But watching you yesterday, helping those people with no guarantee of success, no recognition, no reward, that showed me something no test could reveal." The morning light had grown stronger now, filling the office with a warm glow. Darius sat quietly, absorbing Richard's words. "You know what impressed me most?" Richard continued. "Not just what you did, but how you did it. No grandstanding, no resentment. Just quiet, competent leadership focused entirely on helping others." He returned to his chair, leaning back with a new certainty in his posture. "That's not something you can fake. That's not something you can test for." Finally, Richard met Darius's eyes and said firmly, You didn't pass a test. You changed it. The afternoon sun blazed overhead as workers hurriedly assembled a small stage outside the firm's building. Metal chairs clinked into rows while microphones were tested with quiet taps. Community members began gathering, their curious whispers filling the air. News vans parked along the curb, cameras pointed toward the makeshift podium. Darius stood just inside the building's glass doors, his heart thundering against his crisp white shirt. Through the growing crowd, he spotted his mother Lena, wearing her best dress, the one she saved for special occasions. She stood near the front, hands clasped tightly together, looking both nervous and proud. "Ready?" Richard appeared beside him, straightening his own tie. Darius nodded, though his throat felt dry. "Yes, sir." They stepped out into the sunlight together, climbing the short steps to the stage. Camera flashes sparked like lightning. Darius tried to focus on his breathing, on staying present in this surreal moment. The crowd had swelled. Residents from his neighborhood mixed with business suits and press badges. He recognized faces from the tenant meetings, people whose kitchen tables he'd sat at, whose children he'd entertained while explaining legal documents to their parents. Richard approached the cluster of microphones, adjusting them with practiced ease. The murmuring crowd fell silent. Darius watched his mentor's face, noting how the usual guardedness had been replaced by something more open, more human. "Thank you all for coming," Richard began, his voice carrying clearly across the gathered audience. "I've called this press conference to announce a significant change in our organization's direction. But first, I need to speak about failure." A ripple of surprise moved through the crowd. Richard continued, his tone measured but sincere. "Not the failure of others, but my own. For years, I've prided myself on being a good judge of character, on creating systems to evaluate worth and potential. But recently, I was shown how deeply flawed that approach can be." His gaze swept across the audience, landing briefly on the investor who had withdrawn support, now standing uncomfortably near the back. "We've become too reliant on paper trails and background checks, on superficial markers of success. In doing so, we've overlooked the kind of character that truly matters. The quiet integrity that shows up day after day, that helps without reward, that persists when everything falls apart." Richard turned slightly, gesturing to Darius. "Standing beside me is someone who taught me this lesson. Many of you know Darius Whitfield as the young man who returned my wallet containing $10,000. What you don't know is that was just the beginning of his story." The cameras clicked rapidly as Richard continued, describing Darius's work at the firm, his innovative ideas, and, most importantly, his actions after the project's initial collapse. When everything fell apart, when his reputation was questioned and opportunities withdrawn, Darius didn't retreat. He didn't bitter. Instead, he went right back into his community and continued helping, organizing, advocating, leading, without any guarantee of recognition or reward. That's not the kind of integrity you can test for. That's the kind of integrity you build futures on." Richard paused, letting his words settle. Darius felt the weight of every eye on him, but kept his focus on Lena, drawing strength from her steady presence. "Today I'm announcing a new initiative," Richard declared. "A fully funded community housing and youth development program, with an initial investment of $20 million. This program will be led by Darius Whitfield, not as an intern or employee, but as a full partner." The crowd erupted in surprised applause. Darius saw several of his neighbors grabbing each other's hands, tears streaming down their faces. "Furthermore," Richard continued once the noise settled, "I'm pleased to announce that our previous investors have recommitted their support, this time under Darius's direct leadership." The same investor who had withdrawn now stepped forward, approaching the microphone. His usual corporate polish seemed slightly cracked with humility. "We made a mistake in our initial assessment," he admitted. "We looked at data when we should have looked at character. We're honored to support this initiative under Mr. Whitfield's vision." Richard gestured Darius forward. The microphones loomed before him like a challenge. Darius straightened his shoulders, thinking of all the kitchen tables he'd sat at, all the stories he'd heard, all the dreams deferred in his community. "Thank you," he began simply, his voice clear and steady. "But this isn't about me. This is about the single mother working 3 jobs to keep her children in their home. This is about the elderly couple facing eviction from the apartment they've lived in for 30 years. This is about the kids who dream of college, but can't see a way forward." His words carried across the hushed crowd, authentic and unscripted. "This opportunity isn't mine alone. It belongs to all of us. And I promise you, we're just getting started." The applause that followed was thunderous, but Darius barely heard it. His eyes found Lena in the crowd, tears streaming down her face, her smile brighter than the summer sun. Their shared gaze held volumes: pride, relief, disbelief, and most of all, the pure joy of seeing hope become reality. Autumn sunlight warmed the freshly painted walls of the new community center, its windows gleaming like promises kept. Colorful balloons bobbed in the gentle breeze, while families streamed through the open doors, their voices mixing with music and laughter. The transformation of the neighborhood was striking. Gone were the crumbling facades and broken windows. In their place stood renovated buildings with neat flower boxes and fresh paint, sidewalks swept clean, and community gardens bursting with late-season vegetables. Darius adjusted his tie, taking in the scene from the community center's steps. Children darted between chairs set up for the ceremony, their parents calling after them with mixture of joy and exasperation. Volunteers in matching T-shirts directed people to refreshment tables and activity stations. Local leaders mingled with residents. The usual barriers of status dissolved in the day's celebration. "Ready?" Richard appeared beside him, looking satisfied with the turnout. "Almost," Darius replied, checking his pocket for the 100th time. The keys were still there, their metal edges pressing against his fingers like a reminder of how far they'd come. He spotted Lena approaching through the crowd, wearing a sky-blue dress she'd bought specially for the occasion. Her hair was styled differently, and she carried herself with a new lightness, the weight of constant worry finally lifting from her shoulders. Several residents stopped to hug her. She'd become something of a neighborhood mother figure over the past weeks, offering encouragement and wisdom to families going through their own transformations. "Mom!" Darius called, his voice catching slightly. She turned, her smile brightening. "This is incredible," she said, reaching them. "I barely recognize the place." "Come with me," Darius said, taking her hand. "There's something I need to show you." He led her away from the community center, down the newly paved sidewalk lined with young trees. They passed the renovated apartment buildings where many of their former neighbors now lived in dignity, no longer fearing sudden eviction or unsafe conditions. Children played in the protected courtyards, while parents chatted on benches, a scene of community that had once seemed impossible. They stopped in front of a modest but well-maintained house with a small front yard. Fresh paint gleamed on the trim, and potted plants flanked the front steps. Lena's steps slowed, her grip on Darius's hand tightening. "What is this?" she whispered, though her eyes said she already knew. Darius reached into his pocket and withdrew the keys, their brass surface catching the sunlight. "This is yours, Mom. Through the program we built, no more counting bills at the kitchen table, no more fixing broken lights, no more wondering if we'll make rent." Lena's hand flew to her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. The same gesture she'd made that day when Richard first knocked on their apartment door. But this time, The tears weren't from shock or desperation. They were pure joy, pure pride, pure release. "My boy," she managed, pulling him into a fierce hug. "My wonderful, honest boy." They held each other for a long moment, both remembering the years of struggle, the nights of worry, the dreams deferred but never abandoned. When they pulled apart, Lena took the keys with trembling hands, touching them like they might disappear. "Go on," Darius encouraged. "Take a look inside." As Lena climbed the steps to her new front door, Darius heard the community center celebration continuing in the distance. They would need to return soon for the official ceremony, but this moment, this was just for them. Later, as the afternoon celebration was in full swing, Darius noticed a small commotion near the refreshment table. A young boy, maybe 10 years old, stood nervously shifting from foot to foot, holding something in his hands. As Darius approached, he recognized the gleam of a smartphone. "I found it," the boy said quickly, holding out the phone. "On the bench over there. I didn't touch anything except to pick it up." Darius felt an almost physical jolt of recognition. The uncertainty in the boy's voice, the desire to do right warring with the fear of not being believed. He knelt down, bringing himself to eye level with the child. "Thank you," he said, his voice warm and sincere. "What's your name?" "Marcus," the boy replied, relaxing slightly at Darius's tone. "What you did, Marcus, choosing to return this, that takes real courage. It's not always easy to do the right thing, especially when no one's watching." Marcus's eyes widened slightly. "You think it was brave?" "I know it was," Darius said, thinking of a leather wallet and a choice that had changed everything. Integrity. Doing the right thing even when it's hard. That matters more than anything. It can change lives. Sometimes, it can change whole communities. Behind them, the newly renovated buildings stood as testament to that truth. Families moved safely through spaces designed with their needs in mind. Children played without fear. Elderly residents sat in comfort, watching their neighborhood bloom again. Marcus straightened slightly, pride replacing nervousness. Together, they walked to the information desk to turn in the phone, Darius's hand resting supportively on the boy's shoulder. I hope you enjoyed that story. Please like the video and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. In the meantime, I have handpicked 2 stories for you that I think you will enjoy. Have a great day.